Today, we're going to talk about how we are optimizing our SRE team's effectiveness, enabling our engineering teams to deliver applications in a reliable, stable, performant, and providing digital experience that matches our first-in-class journalism. Agenda is to go over some of the challenges that we have in our environment and talk about how we work as a team. And then Vinessa will unpack some of the ways how we are building operational maturity across the teams using product mindset. And then I'll walk you into an engagement model that we use to work with the engineering teams and develop tooling or lessons that could be applied across the org. And then we'll also take you to some of the ways that we evangelize our SRE practices that are meant to drive the culture change that you need when you have your applications running in the cloud. Firstly, the challenges. In 2018, we transformed our infrastructure. We shut down our data centers and migrated to the cloud. This transformation was not just about the migration, but the tooling that we used to have and the culture we had around how we manage our infrastructure. We adopted containerization and put in tools that would enable us to build in a cloud-native way. I'll talk more into that tooling, but during that time, we built the tooling that enabled our engineers basically to deliver applications faster, and the migration was successful and on time. This all sounds like happily ever after, but right after the migration, we realized our real SRE work has just begun. Let's take a look at one of our business workflow that we have that spans across the teams. The workflow is basically a newsroom trying to publish an article, and it shows up on our front-end applications. The editor would compile the article in our content management system, hit publish. The article lands on our publishing pipeline. And the content APIs formats these contents into a way that is consumable by all the front-end apps. At a high level, this is a simple workflow. But during the migration, what we did was we enabled the teams by providing autonomy over their cloud infrastructure by giving them full control of their infrastructure in their GCP projects. So if you were to look at the content management system here, it's made up of microservices, but the team that manages that system owns end-to-end of all the microservices and deploy in their own GCP project, and so are the other systems in this workflow. The challenge here is our user experience depends on all these systems that we are seeing here. We did not have an aggregated view of how we measure our user experience when teams are working in their own GCP projects and working with their own infrastructure in a way that they're missing out on how their system is impacting a wider user experience. From an engineering standpoint, there are two users here. One, the newsroom that's trying to publish an article, and two, the readers that are consuming. So we had to rethink, and we saw a need for building those aggregated views of measuring how our user experience gets impacted when these systems are making changes. So initially, I spoke about the tooling that we built and enabled the migration. Is basically what we did was we adapted to the cloud-native tools. We have consistent CI/CD with drone. And we started using Kubernetes and asked Google to manage our Kubernetes, which is GKE. We deployed NewYorkTimes.com on GKE a year ago. And we have Prometheus for understanding how the systems perform. And we also have Fastly, a well self-serviceable, distributed edge caching tool that is basically available for any front-end engineering team to put their application out. And we also have transformed from being this data center-based infrastructure to infrastructure as code with Terraform. And we also have tooling to support the application's needs, like secrets management with Vault and PKI management with Vault. So the tooling is already there. But what we are missing is a component that you don't see on the slide. That is the application. So we have the tooling, but what we need is operational maturity on the teams to use these tools in a way that they can build applications that match the SLOs, that match the user experience that is required from them, right? So having that operational maturity alongside of these great tools is a need that we have seen. So what is the lay of the land at the New York Times is we have 400+ applications, and we have 40+ teams managing 400 applications. And these applications range from cloud-native, user-facing apps to enterprise apps that are built by third-party, but the teams deploy for our internal use. So there's a wide variety of these apps. With those wide variety, there are wide variety of needs for these apps to be in the cloud. That reflects in the teams, too. Like, the teams have different experience and skills, especially around SRE skills, that they would need to manage the type of, depending on the type of the app. But however, what is consistent is, after the migration, we're asking the teams to manage their own infrastructure. That is consistent, regardless of what type of app they use or build. So what we saw is we, as a team, had to work with these teams, engage with them, and build skills on their teams that would enable them, regardless of what type of app they're managing, would be successful in meeting their SLOs. So in the data center world, we had a centralized ops team. So we came from that world to the cloud. And this centralized ops team was managing infrastructure for the teams. So that is a culture change that we've gone through in the last 1.5 years. But however, the processes that we have, they still reflect the data center model. And we still continue to use them, which is more like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. I'll give you an example. Our biggest example that I can think of when it comes to managing systems in the data center way is our priority one management, or priority one defect management process, where it works really well if we apply it to a single team, because that's what it is built for. But when an outage spans across multiple teams, then it becomes really hard. The teams try to figure out the problem and then pass that problem to other teams, figuring out, like, this is not the cause that we have. And it goes to the other team and goes to another team until finally a resolution is arrived. So we've seen that process fail when we have distributed engineering teams managing their own infrastructure, and we had to rethink the way how we could managing our priority one defects. So that's just an example. So we had to rethink about the processes that we have from the data center. How did we address all these problems? You can guess it, yes, through SRE program. But how did we do it? I would start off with what we do. For most of our teams, when we talk about how we form the team, there's always a backstory, and who is an SRE is an interesting conversation that I often hear. But our team is pretty much what the book prescribes. We went by the book. We build tooling and automation to help our engineering teams to manage their production systems, may it be incident management, may it be tracking their SLOs. The most important thing that we do is engage with the engineering teams. You engage to build the operational maturity on the teams. It could be on a specific problem, or it could be a tooling gap that might be useful for other engineering teams. Or it could just be anything that involves building reliability into the systems. That's what we engage on a one-on-one basis for. We also provide documentation and process as a way to guide these teams to use our tooling to evangelize the SRE practices. And we go one step further and provide workshops around how to be an incident commander, workshops around how do you manage your incidents. So that's the process and guidance we provide. So now you've seen the challenges. You've seen what we do as a team. Now my colleague Vinessa will talk about how the program works to build that operational maturity I've been talking about.
Thanks. Great. Thanks, Prashant. So product management mindset. So Prashant mentioned we had a central team that controlled all of the infrastructure decisions for New York Times applications. So shifting to GCP and making that decision to have now application development teams manage their own infrastructure, it required a shift in our thinking. Our team delivery engineering with the SRE function was formed not to control the infrastructure, because other app teams control their own infrastructure. We sought to empower these teams. So therefore, we had to shift our way of thinking as well. I know, you get a project manager for the first time at a tech conference, you're going to hear the Agile Manifesto. But that was a source of inspiration for how we decided to operationalize SRE. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And it's not to say that the tooling and processes and all the cool things that you see today and all the great things that we do, I mean, they're vital to making change. But what we're talking about is when you are aiming that teams have to be operationally mature, which means they're going to be managing SRE practices on their own, that's a culture change. And that starts with people. So product management thinking, it starts with viewing our internal teams as customers. And what that means is you have to incentivize teams using your tooling, teams listening to your guidance, teams using and applying your processes. I'm going to be honest, this sometimes is the hardest part of my job. It would be a lot easier in the short term if we just require teams to use our tools. But that comes at that risk. Because what it means if we don't do this, we risk not being able to provide tooling that speeds up development, that improves the velocity, that helps teams deliver a reliable end-user experience. So we ourselves, we are incentivized to constantly seek that feedback and get that data to drive our decision-making process. Our team formed in March 2016, and we called out and identified a focus of how we were going to collect this feedback and data was going to be around how teams perceived us. Why did we need to measure perception? Our old infrastructure and systems teams, they were perceived as blockers and bottlenecks because they had to control everything as part of the mission and the way we were structured. And so we wanted to change that perception as well. We wanted to build trust with teams to feel that they can rely on us on our tooling and our best practices. So the feedback process, it's evolved. We've been running the process for a couple years, and it's evolved a bit, but we've come up with a really stable process. And it's very much modeled what you might see from front-end design. And the process runs about twice a year. And the process, it builds on user empathy as well as the ability to measure patterns over time. We always aim for balanced representation because we're building tools for all of the times. And when I say balanced representation, it's not just hearing from teams, but recently we've also been aiming to make sure the non-engineers in the team understand the value we provide. Because a lot of times it's those folks that actually control and govern the roadmap. And then, of course, it has to help us plan. It has to be actionable. And it's not to say that this is the only source of input into our roadmap. There's always top-down efforts that have to be done, particularly in the security and compliance arena, but this is a major input that fuels what we do and where our focus will be. Our feedback, the way we collect feedback, it's two parts. It's a survey and it's qualitative interviews. The survey itself is very much designed with user empathy in mind. It's very short. It's mostly quantitative questions. Again, we want to make it easy for people. If you make something easy in terms of getting feedback, you're going to get more feedback. And it's obvious, right? But the fact of the matter is, sometimes people want to give a lot of information. But you can't substitute a survey with for a conversation. So what we do, and this is one of my favorite questions, is our very first question, let me see if I use a pointer, is we say we value your feedback. If you want to talk with us, leave your name here, and we'll reach out and have a conversation with you. And we handle that as part of the qualitative interview process. Now, the process actually started with just a few managers on the team doing these interviews. But we decided to actually open this whole process up so that anyone in our team, any engineer, can sign up to interview someone or even scribe for an interview. This has delivered benefits not just in terms of us being able to get better reach in getting more feedback. It also builds a lot more empathy. When you have a conversation with people, they feel like they're being heard, but it also motivates our engineers. I mean, how often in an internal tooling team do you actually get to do a practice like this? And this is a catalyst also because it let us create much better guidelines and templates in how we actually create qualitative interviews. And so by having this, we're able to collect all this information in a consistent way. We take these results and we synthesize them as a team to make sure that we have a correct view in our findings. This means if you're in test automation or even if you're in SRE, you are part of this process and you're represented. And then we carve out a whole week where we dive into, and we call it the Team Brainstorm Week. And this is when we go through all the pain points that people went through. What are things that we're doing that we should actually continue or do more of? And what are the opportunities that we need to explore as part of our roadmap? And then, of course, we share these results out. It's very important. I want to emphasize this because sometimes there's this tendency to collect this information, and it can be really hard. It's hard to sometimes say, yeah, we really didn't do really great at it. But it's more important to say, we recognize this, and this is what we're doing about it. Or what we even heard from the feedback is, hey, I get it if you can't do everything because there's just so much to do, but at least can you tell me that you're hearing it and understand and explain what is the other part? I see someone nodding, you get it. So we share this feedback for the coming quarters, and then we say, okay, here are potential projects, but it's also a filter in terms of who are teams that we should be partnering with to work out these complex problems, and that is what Prashant's going to talk about in the engagement model.
Thank you. Engagements are opportunities for your team to work with other engineering teams on a one-on-one basis and focus on maximizing the results of why you are engaging with. right? The idea here is to generate automation or learning that could be applied across the org. And we work with engineering teams, and we focus on maximizing the results by following our engagement model. So if you are an SRE engineering manager, it's very important to define who as an SRE is and what his role is or her role is, and manage communications and collaborations with across the team to build that operational maturity. But for that, you have to proactively define all of that in your engagement model. You may ask, why would we need an engagement model too, right? Yeah, when we did not have an engagement model, we were still working with teams and engaging with them. However, the issue there was we always had misaligned priorities. And we were in a situation in one of our engagements where whether we focus on capacity planning or whether we want to build a tooling app that is like blue-green deployments on our Kubernetes tooling that we provide to our engineering teams. So not just the priority alignment, but when we were dealing with the culture change, when there was an ops team, and we as a SRE team were working on the engineering team, they often looked at us as ops engineers who could do this one-off scripting for them. But that's not an SRE is. We clearly defined that in our engagement model and put it in front of our engineering teams. And our model is based off of shared goals. If you read the SRE workbook, there's a whole chapter on how you should engage with your engineering teams, and I've contributed the model in detail on chapter 18. But at a high level, it's basis of shared goals. Shared goals are, as a team that is building operational maturity on other teams, my goal is to build something that can be applied across the org, not just with them. So we use our goals, and we use engineering team's goals, align them, and call that as the scope of an engagement. Once the shared goals are set, the engineers will sprint on the milestones, and the managers will keep the communication and feedback loop alive until the end of the communication. And we measure the impact by performing operational maturity assessments or point time estimates of operational maturity before we begin the engagement and after the engagement is done. And we derive the metrics to compare what the engagement results are, and we publish them. I'll walk you through one of the examples. As you've seen, we had this challenge of having shared views of reliability across multiple teams so that we could capture the user experience and monitor our SLOs. Shared view of reliability on Milestone Zero, we call it Milestone Zero because at the time we did not really know what shared view of reliability meant and how would we build that tooling that could be applied across our org. So the Milestone Zero is to derive that requirements and plan for the rollout. This is a unique engagement because what we did was we approached our Google TAM and customer engineers and put out our problems, and they referred to Google CREs. So we worked alongside of Google CREs. They were like partners with our team. They were participating in regular check-ins to review what SLOs really meant while we were working with a frameworks team that had multiple apps built on that framework and build a tool that could capture these SLOs in a single pane of glass. I'm not able to show the exact framework SLOs here, but this is our drone SLOs. built on the same tool, but it's a place where anyone can see SLOs for all the apps for that framework. It's an example of like how you could involve Google CREs alongside and get the benefit of them drive your goal. Google CREs even did a workshop for non-technical participants in that engagement and explained what SLOs really meant, because it's really hard to get SLOs right if you're doing it the first time. And that was our first time ever to have standard SLOs rolled out. Today we have this tool, and we are working on rolling that out. So our engagements are not just like tooling apps, building operational maturity. We also drive special events at the New York Times. And Vinessa will talk about one such special event.
Thanks. This is such an exciting time to be at the New York Times. It's events and elections like this that make me particularly proud to be part of the organization. And elections are always a special event. But this year, it's been kind of different, the political climate itself. Plus the attention to our site, it's just been unprecedented. And also, since 2016, our digital subscriptions have doubled. We were expecting traffic for a midterm like never before. We formed a cross-functional project, and the mission was that New York Times would remain to be a key destination for reliable, up-to-date election results. It was a cross-team effort, and we wanted to ensure that our news and interactive content was stable, performant, always up to date, and as our newsroom intends to for our users. And we also aimed to minimize issues in case they did come up, and that we would also have a minimum response and measures in place to resolve them quickly. And I want you to remember, this was our first ever event like this on GCP. Usually the scope for elections, it typically focuses on our interactive and our publishing content up through what we kind of call the core stack of how it looks to the end user on the site. Traditionally, we always just take down the paywall because it was just too complex and just too costly to be able to do that for an event. But now being able to leverage GKEs, auto-scaling, and the team's investment in SRE as a discipline, as well as all the work they've done with test automation, it let them have better basics in place with regards to like performance metrics. Essentially, for the first time, our business and marketing team was able to take advantage of this surge in traffic as a business opportunity. We decided to leave the paywall up as a tactic to gain user registrations on our site so that later we could reach out to those users to see if they would be interested in becoming subscribers. So this increased the scope, and we were looking at least over 30 teams that we needed to assemble around readiness. And this involved a lot. We were focused very much on the technical readiness of it, but it also did involve coordination with newsroom, marketing, business, advertising. So how did we assemble this effort? I remember being at Next about a couple years ago, and there's a really great talk. I think GCP Podcast also does an episode on it. And it's Home Depot is with Google's CRE team, and they're talking about the preparation for Home Depot's first Black Friday on GCP. Both companies partnered together. They made an upfront commitment to roll out tooling and best practices, and that Google would be in the room with Home Depot all throughout Black Friday. Home Depot's success was Google's success. Any failure on Home Depot's site was also be shared with Google. It was a shared fate. And so when I was asked to be one of the project managers, our project owner, being outside delivery engineering, as well as a lot of the other election leads on it, we're wondering, how do we start? What kind of work do we do? And I immediately thought back to that shared fate example. we were able to partner with our delivery engineering SRE team to collaborate with them and start mapping out the work that we needed to get all these teams ready for elections. This work started with doing a series of architectural reviews. We pooled representatives from all these teams in one big room, and they went over their architecture, questions like what failovers did they have in place, and our SRE team was able to identify quick resiliency wins that they could work on. Prashant mentioned a lot of our challenges with incident management because teams were still reliant on a central systems infrastructure team to handle a lot of their P1 incidents. But that just wouldn't work during midterms. Our team had started building up training materials around incident management, what to do, how people should actually be managing an incident. These are practices actually inspired by emergency response today. And we trained over 100 people in the technology and newsroom how to respond in case there was a production incident, what we also refer to as a P1. And of course, we partnered with our Google TAMs. They let us know on day one of this project that they would be with us on site. And we figured out and documented what were all the processes that we needed to do, and also what resources would be available, so if something happened, they would be there for us. Throughout the duration of the project, we conducted stress tests. So increasing load on the systems to find out where the vulnerabilities were. Not only did this help us technically, but so after each test, we would conduct the learning review or blameless postmortem. And we would go through the timeline and then discuss where did we get lucky, where did things go right, where did things not go wrong. And we didn't just talk about it from a technical level. This also helped guide just even logistics, which teams had to sit next to each other because you can't put 30 teams in a war room. But that also just gauged what was the optimum way that we needed to work and communicate to make sure we were successful on midterms. So here is us during election. See if you can anyone find Prashant? There he is, hi. And he's here with our Google rep, and we're talking with our interactive news team. But I could show more pictures, but let's go through the results. Now, I can't go through particular details with traffic and subscription, but yes, it was record traffic for our midterms. You could see particularly one zoom shot is the registration paywall. They started, you could see before, can anyone guess the peak when midterms happen? About 40 times its traffic, and then you could even follow up with a news bump in the morning news cycle. This allowed significant registration growth. And of course, incidents occurred. We did have production incidents, but it was actually really small. And because we had put all this preparation into having responses in place and failover plans in place, we had very minimal user impact. The resolution was rapid and almost instant in terms of the end user experience. So it's important to celebrate events like this. We talked about our mindset. We talked about how we work internally, how we partner engagement with teams. But how do we evangelize ourselves across our organization? I've worked on a lot of front-end teams and in advertising, and it's kind of straightforward to explain your success. You could just point to a front-end feature. You could point to a revenue impact. But our type of work, it's hard to explain to people in the business that don't do what we do. I often say we're kind of like stage crew. You don't realize our success until things actually break, and then it's, yeah. So we were also, though, very inspired from feedback that we got through earlier feedback surveys. And someone specifically said, God, I do all this work with your team, and this has helped me, but we don't really get to talk about it this much. We should share more of these stories. So inspired with that, we decided to kick off a project within our team. We held New York Times' first ever internal tech conference. Now, delivery engineering, internally, we abbreviate ourselves to DV, and we thought we'd do a fun little wordplay on DevOps Day, so we did DevOps Day. Our CFP called out, we want to know what's working, what's not working, even since our cloud migrations in Q2. And we wanted teams to share their best practices for operational support, testing, tooling, and automation. It was very important that we reached out to the teams first, because again, we want to empower other teams. We didn't want to just be us talking. And it wasn't. We had 13 talks that included presentation and demos with topics like production deployments with App Engine, using HashiCorp Vault for GCP serverless solutions. 75% of these speakers were outside of our team, and most of these speakers were first-time speakers, or it was a really long time before they spoke. We also had, in addition to presentations and topics, we had a workshop on how to facilitate learning reviews, and we also held a panel comprised of teams that went through production readiness reviews to talk about what their experiences were like in working with our team. The majority of volunteers that day were also outside our team, which was also very impactful to kind of just get even the not anybody involved. And it was a pretty snowy day. We held the conference on late January, and if anyone's from New York, you know it snows and the commuting is not always that great. But we actually had over 100 people sign up that day. And that count doesn't include all the people who joined remotely. One snippet from our panel, this was from an audience member who was specifically talking about the panel production readiness reviews. How powerful it was. And I think the other takeaway from this is that this person referred to it of, wow, you're customers. For us, that was already a big win. So going forward, we're aiming to have more of these events in tech. If anything, the feedback was overwhelmingly, we want more of these events. We want to share more of these stories. And I remember remembering Prashant and I on an elevator ride down when we were working on this presentation. There was a developer who ran into us in the elevator. He goes, you know, my goal next year is to present at the next DevOps Day. So I'm going to hand off to Prashant now, who's going to talk more about how we're looking forward.
By no means we have covered all the challenges that we have on the work that we saw post-migration. Looking at 2019 and beyond, looks like problem. There's a slide missing, but we're looking to build operational maturity on the teams, continue doing our engagements with the teams to build tooling and build stability into our applications. But a quick summary, tools can reduce toil, but SREs can impact by partnering with teams and building operational maturity. So think about engaging on teams that are having specific problems that could be replicated elsewhere easily. So you want to tackle those through your engagements. And apply product management mindset to build that operational maturity, because building operational maturity is a culture change. Treat your engineering teams as your customers. Ask feedback on a regular cadence. And source that back in as your requirements for your tooling or guidance. And define an engagement model that is goal-oriented and works for your team. Because as I mentioned, engaging with your teams is a key for your success. Leverage your TAMs, customer engineers. They have insight into what works and what doesn't, because they have more experience tapping into the resources from Google. And working with Google CRE for us had turned out into a really great experience, because we were able to get validation from someone outside of the company to look at the tooling and the SLOs that we were building. And evangelize your SRE practices to stir up that culture change. And but not least, celebrate your successes. We as a company are growing, and my team is growing. Please take a look at our job site. We're looking for talented engineers. I know I can see a lot here. And check out our blogs, open.nytimes.com, where we talk about what we do.